Look, pain and stiffness in the lower back is a. So I myself had a low back issue. In fact, I had a disc bulge after an incident trying to lift too heavy in the gym. This has actually happened a couple times to me across a number of years. And on the last one that just happened about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I figured that it was a good enough time to figure out, well, why am I sort of allowing this to happen to myself, and how do I prevent this happening again? So ultimately, this led me down the course of, well, why does injury occur in the first place? And like I explained in some other videos, the idea between your tissue's capacity to deal with something and the stress or load that you place on those tissues, the understanding of that concept really started to shift my thinking in how to prevent my low back issue from returning. For anyone that hasn't watched my previous video on the tissue capacity, go check it out. But the quick summary is that if you were to have a graph showcasing your tissue's capacity, and it's going to be a line that goes up and down, this is across time. So your tissue's capacity is the makeup of all your different tissues, muscle, ligament, fascia, whether it be other types of tissues involved as well. And those tissues all have a certain threshold at which they can deal with stress. If you put a pin slowly on your skin, there's a certain level that it won't puncture. But if you increase the threshold or the pressure, at some point the pin will puncture the skin, and there's been a failure of that protective barrier. So the same thing is true when we're doing movement and generally loading up our tissues. So that capacity, let's just say of the lower back, to keep it simple, the lower back has a certain capacity at any given time. And if you're tired and you haven't been sleeping well, poor nutrition, you're not hydrated, your tissue's ability to deal with stress is going to be lower. And as you accrue wear over time, or as you accrue fatigue in the system over time, the risk of an injury increases greatly, because all of a sudden the stress or work that you also accrue across the day, so the things that you're doing, I'm going to the gym, I'm walking around, I'm sitting in a desk all day long, I am placing stress on these structures. And then all of a sudden I might just simply go and pick something up, and all of a sudden my back is sore, or I've thrown my back out, as some might say. So that concept is really important to understand, is that we've got a certain tissue capacity. We're always performing some level of work, or putting some kind of stress on our tissues, because we live, we move. And so in order to reduce our chances of injury, we want to have the biggest buffer possible between what our tissues can manage and what we do in our everyday life. So this is why, the reason why that really changed the way I think about my low back pain is because historically, after an injury, uh, you're always a bit worried about returning back into something that caused it, something like a deadlift, for instance. So whether you like deadlifting or not, whether you think it's a good exercise to do or not, the point of this is, normally when you injure yourself, the scariest thing to do is then to train the thing that either caused the injury or places stress around the injured area. And that's completely fair enough in the early days. But most people, when they've had a low back injury in particular, they allow things to settle, and that could take days to weeks to months. Once things are finally settled, they get back into their normal routine of activity and things they like to do, but they ignore the strengthening, they ignore the exercises that cause the back issue, and they essentially just leave it alone in the hopes that it doesn't come back. Inevitably, fast forward a few months, a few years, or whatever it may be, and all of a sudden the same issue arises from a different sequence, or a different event. Again, maybe rather than picking something up, I'm going for a jog, and all of a sudden it gets really tight and sore the next day, similar to what I've had in the past. Or again, I'm at work, I'm sitting in the chair, I go to get up too quickly and it goes. And these sorts of events, again, they're very confusing, because for most people, you're not doing anything wild or out of the ordinary. But what you failed to do is you failed to create an environment where your tissues in your lower back, or around your lower back, or the tissues that support your lower back, have been able to increase their capacity such to the point that you have a really large buffer zone. And so that buffer zone is so small, you're not in pain, but anything that goes past that threshold and all of a sudden you're back having the same issue that you had in the past. Knowing this and understanding this really makes you go, okay, so the symptoms have gone, that's great. But if I'm thinking about my long-term future and I'm thinking I don't want this to happen again, because maybe this is the second time that's happened, maybe it's the third time that it's happened. Okay, how do we stop this from happening again? Or is this just, this is just me now? Ultimately, no, it's not just you now, and we can largely stop it from happening again, or it's certainly reduce the risk of it happening again. And we want to do that by simply improving the tissues in that area so that they have a much greater capacity. And the easiest way ultimately to do that is through a strengthening and mobility regime. There are plenty of other factors that we want to look at as well. We want to look at really good sleep, good nutrition, good hydration. A lot of those basics, they add a massive amount into what you can handle at any given stage. An athlete at some point in time, they're going to have greater tissue capacity than most people. But if you catch them on a bad day when they're fatigued, their body's overrun and exhausted, they've been sick the past week, and then they just go for something simple as a little jog or a walk or whatever, they too can be at risk of injury at that point. So one, we want to increase our tissues capacity, and we really want to do that through a program that is going to specifically stress the target tissues. So what I see a lot of in low back rehab is a lot of core work and like core re-strengthening. And I got nothing against that, and it can be really, really helpful. But in the long term, I don't want just to be reliant on my core. I want to be confident in the muscles, in the joints, in the ligaments, in the things that all surround the back, and the movements that I'm going to be using my back and placing, shearing loads on my back as well. So I want to have a strong back when I'm bending over and picking something up. I don't want to just be reliant on having to tense core or do any of these other measures. They can come along with it, and core stuff, as I said, I'm not saying that's a bad thing to do. I'm just saying we neglect the tissues of the back way, way too much. So in the program that we've just done, we've just finished off, for instance, with Sam. He had a chronic sort of low back issue that had been going on for about 12 months, had sciatica down one side of the leg as well. Both were, they're both related. The sciatica was probably a little bit more annoying initially, and then it would sort of swap, and then his back pain would be more of the annoying one. And it all originated from this injury a while ago where he slipped over. The point was, he too had been sort of ongoing with back issues for roughly about 12 months. And it took him a few goes of trying to figure out, well, whatever I'm currently doing right now doesn't seem to be changing my current symptoms. So maybe I need to look at, well, what's something that I haven't done so far? And for him, that was, again, strengthening the specific tissues that were most vulnerable. There's something quite nice about the metaphor as well of strengthening the point at which you're weakest. And I do really believe that wherever we find a vulnerability, or we find concerns or fears with a certain movement in particular, then there's a really good chance that that scary movement is exactly what we need to slowly improve and train. So the program that put together, it will largely go across 4, 8, and 12 weeks, depending on what cycle and what stage you're at with low back issues. Again, I designed this around for myself to make sure that I had the best chance to understand how can I get out of an issue that I already had. How can I then maintain my back so that I'm not going to have issues in the future? And of course, how do I then translate that into better performance if I'm going to go back into long distance running, which I am, unfortunately. So hopefully this has gone to explain a little bit of the philosophy and why the program was sort of built and what it's sort of built around. For each person, it's going to be a little bit different. There is going to be a sort of a customization for it, because depending on what you come in with, not everyone's injury is the same. The symptoms might be similar, and that's why it's I'm very confident in the ability to improve low backs because I've seen quite a number now. And so I sort of at least have a pretty good sense of, well, for this particular style of symptom, this is where we want to go down. It's not a race. We will get there eventually. And if you have had recurrent back episodes or back issues, I highly recommend that you seek out some assistance with it. Start the journey of improving it, because you don't want to be going through life not being able to bend over confidently, not being able to lift up your kids, and not being able to do the things that you'd like to do. Too many people live with low back pain. It is the most chronic condition in terms of a musculoskeletal condition. It costs a huge amount in the industry for sick days, and just it's the number one issue that people have in terms of just a pain arising. So we're doing something a little bit wrong in society, or at least we're not solving it as well as we could. And I believe that one thing that we're majorly missing is simply providing stress to that area, voluntary stress to that area, to improve the capacity for it to deal with all the things we do throughout the day, which for most of us is sitting down. So the sitting down position, we know, has been causing issues for low backs for a long time. I'm more likely to get office workers in for low back issues than just about anyone else. And so clearly the continuous state of leaving ourselves in a sitting position, it seems to be a contributing factor to this widespread low back issue. And I can say for myself, at least, that as you start to improve your low back strength and your confidence rises as well, it's amazing the change. For another client, we've had someone that's had low back issues for a number of years. Every morning they wake up, it is stiff and uncomfortable, and it's sort of they're almost rolling out of bed like they're a plank of wood. You know, it's an uncomfortable feeling waking up, and particularly if they swap beds, if they go to a soft mattress, they have a miserable time the next morning, and they sort of dread that soft mattress. But a month into the program, and this person is waking up without that sort of constant stiffness in the low back, without that constant fear as well in the low back. So this is why I'm sort of confident that we can get really good results for people, really improve the strength and overall integrity of someone's back. Good luck, low back legends. We'll catch you on the other side.